And
Hey,
we
everybody.
welcome you in. Oh, who's starting? Are you starting? Am I starting?
Yeah.
It's
No,
exciting. It's
you
the
start.
penalty kick of
You start.
starts.
It's the penalty kick of starts. That's right. You start. Go right
Cole
ahead.
Pepper, Sam Kavaris here, the Sam and Cole podcast, just moments after Argentina in PKs gets their way in, the shootout victory over the Dutch, and they're on to the finals to take on Germany in the World Cup. We'll talk about that. We've got some Jaguars stuff to talk about, and a couple of stories of local boys make good.
Yes, absolutely.
In the newspaper business. Sam, let's start with the World Cup since we
Let's
know the
mention.
finals now.
All right, and let's mention Black Creek Outfitters.
Of course,
obviously, as our sponsor. I stopped in and I saw Joe Butler and Liz Butler in there yesterday, in fact, and talked to them about what's been going on. Joe's been to some trade shows here recently and has seen some really interesting stuff that is coming down the pipeline. Obviously, if you're still looking for summer stuff, they've got plenty of tech wear and shoes and shirts and rain gear and all that. But boy, the stuff for the fall and even the stuff for next spring that he was talking about, very exciting stuff. Black Creek Outfitters right there in the town center, right in the center of town for just about, as I always say, you walk in and two things are going to happen. You can start on the left and buy everything in the store, and within 5 or 10 seconds, somebody's going to say, "Can I help you?" So Black Creek Outfitters, the sponsor of the Sam and Cole podcast. As you mentioned, Cole, we do know now who's going to play in the championship game, the finals of the World Cup, and that is Argentina and Germany. And as you just read a Twitter post, yet another matchup with no historical references that we can joke about.
Oh, none whatsoever, sure. Mm-hmm.
We had Germany and France, so we had like a whole week to
tell World War II aplenty,
every German-France joke that we could think of. And this one, Argentina, sometimes known as Germany Light.
Doesn't it seem like Germany has an awful lot of historical conflicts that we can go back to? And something about that.
Certainly in the 20th century, they had.
Well, hey, listen, ask the Roman Empire. The Teutons were also part of that once upon a time too. It goes back a little bit further than that.
So it's it's an interesting matchup. A South American team versus a European team that's incredibly organized and I think doesn't get enough credit for being incredibly talented and
they're fast.
As well.
They play very fast. I mean,
they really do.
You look at Germany, you think, oh, they're German, they're efficient, they're measured, they're organized, but they play very fast, and that was one of the, I think, real problems that Brazil had trying to speed them up and try to play a fast game against a team that welcomes that.
And I think that the thing that is overlooked in this game, because so many people talk about the game as a game of nuance and style and finesse, the Germans, and this is why I think Argentina struggled a bit against the Dutch today. The Germans are a big, sturdy team. The Dutch are a big, sturdy team. The Argentinians are not as tall, but the Germans are big, sturdy, and fast and skilled. So I think there's a little bit of issue with that. You notice they play at least one and sometimes two or three guys with their back to the goal. Those, and put somebody on their hip. Those are the kinds of things that the nuances of the game that are overlooked when you're talking about a guy who's 6 feet versus a guy who's 5'9".
Right, and if you talk about styles making matchups, then I think we've got two styles that could make a very good matchup in the finals. But you also have stars. You've got the all-time leading World Cup goal scorer, Miroslav Klose for Germany. You've got a guy who's probably one of the great, who may break that record. You have two guys who might break that record. Muller, who's Klose's teammate for Germany, and of course, and Lionel Messi, who is, despite the fact that Cristiano Ronaldo is the defending World Player of the Year, I think everybody would say right now that Lionel Messi is the best player on the planet.
And is it bad to? I mean, I know his story very, inside and out, from when he was a kid and growth and Barca and all that stuff and moving to Spain. But is it bad to be a fan of that guy because he just plays the game?
No, that's exactly. Let me tell you.
Ronaldo's always giving you that. I don't know if I was offsides or not. That guy fouled me. This and that. All Messi does is play the game. Gets knocked down, he gets up. He scores, he runs back on his other side. I mean, to me that I don't know if that's an American sensibility or not, but I do enjoy watching him play the game because I know he's not going to flop. He's going to play at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Well, flopping is one of the big complaints that a lot of Americans have about soccer, world soccer in particular. So yeah, that part of that maybe appeals to the American sensibility. But same as you know, and some those who have listened to me for a long time know, my favorite baseball player growing up was George Brett for the Royals, a guy who just went out there and played, hustled, believed in that, Joe DiMaggio thing of running out every ball because who knows, you never know what it might be. In fact, Brett's fantasy was for his last at bat to hit a slow roller to the second baseman and bust it down the line and be thrown out by half a step, but he made it closer than it should have been. That was his fantasy for his last at bat. Turns out he singled home a run off of Tom Henke in Arlington in his last at bat. But
George Brett hit a home run for his 3,000th.
No, he had 5 hits to get to 3,000 in one in his game, and then
who was it who homered? Was it Molitor? Boggs. That's who I'm thinking of. Boggs. Boggs who never hit a home run.
Molitor tripled in Kansas City, a game I was at, tripled for his 3,000th hit.
No kidding.
Which is probably tougher to do than a home run.
Yeah, and Boggs is the one that I'm thinking of because here's a guy who never hit any home runs, and then he hit a home run for his 3,000. But to go to the point about this, Brett was such a solid player, he should have been an Oriole. He played the game the right way. He should have played in Baltimore.
Well, and he learned that from Hal McRae, who learned it from Pete Rose when he was in Cincinnati. So this tradition of hustling and not complaining and just going out. Pete Rose did some complaining, but that type of player, Craig Biggio was that way recently inducted into the Hall of Fame. Those kind of players have always spoken to me because of my connection to George Brett. So when I watch Messi play, I think, gosh, plus he's a little guy, but you can, if you watch in the World Cup, if you have watched, nobody has a better first touch than Messi. When the ball comes to him, the first touch to control and change direction, nobody's better at that than Messi. He always seems to control it. He knows where he is on the field, and it's just little moves, and he gets it done, and it's a thing to watch for sure.
And what's interesting too is that obviously the Argentines didn't have far to go for to play in Brazil. Right. The Germans did have far to go, but the Germans built their own complex in Brazil, multi-million euro complex in Brazil. Right? Yeah, and moved there. And by comparison, the Americans, sent scout teams down to look at the hotels, the restaurants, the food availability, the produce, the water. Klinsmann had
the water.
Yeah, right. Klinsmann had his chef down there, his physical therapist, his psychotherapist, had all these people down there. Whereas the Germans decided, we're going to build our own complex, which is exactly what they did in Brazil, a multi-million euro complex. So they go back to that in between games. They live there, they practice there, they have their own security. And by the way, speaking of security, when the Germans beat Brazil 7-1, did you know there was an announcement made in the stadium for the German fans to stay in the stadium, and the Brazilian police force would escort them out of the stadium?
That's the kind of thing that you hear about in a Celtic versus Ranger matchup in Glasgow, when you have two teams in the same city, or a Liverpool Everton, or a Manchester United Man City, something like that, where you've got.
But shouldn't the World Cup be in a place where there's a respect for the rule of law?
Well, and I didn't read anything about Germans jumped either. I think I
didn't hear any, and I was fearful because every time you read anything in depth or listened to anybody talk in depth who was in Brazil, they said that there was this undercurrent of distaste, not for the World Cup, but for how the government handled it, because there's such poverty there. They spent $11 billion. Apparently there was a road overpass that was hurried to completion that collapsed, that killed some people on the way to one of the venues. Those kinds of things that that I guess are a fact of life when FIFA decides to put it in a country that that is going to have to build some infrastructure to get it done, and is going to have to, and they're using it to try to politicize positively, their role not only in the world but in their own country.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that that's happened there. I did find it amusing when FIFA, although they've denied it, has now checked into whether or not the United States would be willing to host the World Cup in 2022 because the whole thing in Qatar might fall apart because of corruption. And now they say that they're not going to build all those air-conditioned stadiums, and they'd have to do it in the winter, and it's 125 degrees there now, so nobody can play that. And they were wondering, well, the United States is one of the countries that might be able to get it together in 8 years and host the World Cup. 8 years? We can hold the World Cup in 8 days.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to move it here? Come on. I mean, we got stadiums, we got roads.
Just give us time to get the buffets laid out. Everything else will be fine.
Everything's fine. That's right.
So we'll get more into the World Cup after the finals and talk about that. Do you have a pick, by the way, Germany, Argentina?
Yeah. I like Germany. I think they're incredibly organized. They have one deficiency, and that is occasionally, and I hate to use soccer talk, they get out of shape in the back occasionally, but outside of that,
I dated a girl like that in college.
they end up as a they control the midfield. They create a lot of chances.
I think it's a 3-2 game. I think it's a fairly high-scoring game for, not 7-1, but I think it's a 3-2 kind of game. And I think Messi's the difference.
Wow.
So I'll pick Argentina.
And this is one of those games I'm really going to enjoy watching with no dog in the fight. I'll root for a good game, which I would love to see.
And I'll point out that when the World Cup began, there were 5 teams that everybody picked, right? And the 5 teams that everybody picked, 2 of them are right here. So we'll see how that all plays out. Let's talk a little Jags talk. We are, as we tape this, about 3 weeks away from training camp starting.
Yep, and a couple of Jaguars were over at Wolfson Children's Hospital today, which, that's the thing as a professional athlete you should do, when you have the time. I do think it's interesting that, a lot of guys, a lot of coaches, this is the time they worry about, because they don't really have that close contact. Players go home, players go somewhere else. They have a tendency to kind of slack off on their conditioning. But the NFL has tried to shorten this time between the last mini camp and the beginning of training camp in order to keep guys in better shape. The Players Union is trying to lengthen that. And in addition to that, there is continual talk that they are going to move the draft, go ahead and move that draft back either into April or at least back a week to the first week of May. It was too much time. It was 2 weeks late. The person who wants to keep it in May, though, is Roger Goodell. Yep. And the thing I keep hearing, Cole, from well-sourced people who are on that Hall of Fame committee that I'm on, is that the league would like to split the draft up into 2 different cities, and the potential is that it'll be in Los Angeles for a Wednesday night in the first round, and then it'll be in Chicago for Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Well, by all means, let's get it to Los Angeles, because no city has done a better job of showing how much they support and love the National Football League.
Yeah.
I mean, you think through the years, they've only lost 5 or 6 teams there, and they really have their act together to get a team back. So I think Los Angeles is an absolute no-brainer to do that.
And I have a daughter that lives there,
yeah.
and so I visit there often. They don't give a damn.
No, so this is
people don't walk around there lamenting that they don't have a football team. If the Dodgers left, it would be a very big deal.
Oh yeah.
But if the Rams leaving, the Raiders leaving,
Here's the thing about doing the draft, and I've said this for years. They need to move the draft around to different cities every year. I mean, imagine what having the draft held at the Jacksonville Veterans Memorial Arena would be. It would look just the same to everybody on TV. If you're watching from around, there's no different there. But it's a chance to engage people at the local level in a way that they don't get a chance to
right.
at times. And so whether you're doing it in Milwaukee or Green Bay or in Jacksonville or in Kansas City or in Cleveland or wherever, move it around every year. and you know, it's a chance, particularly for those northern cities, but for everybody to get that in there, to have that experience of having those teams in and having that you know, the focus of the National Football League on their city that they can't get because they can't host the Super Bowl.
Well, and you know, of course, if it was here, all you would hear is a bunch of complaints about we don't have enough strip clubs or, you know, late night places to get a cocktail.
Well, but I don't think you would, because there's not that expectation around the draft because of the way the draft works, right? That's not. Apparently, you only get to go to strip clubs around the Super Bowl, not during the draft or during training.
That's it? Okay. I think you're probably right.
A couple of local boys make good stories. Patrick Young, you had some news on the former Gator and the former Providence Star.
Well, you know, he wrote in his blog that he got some guaranteed money from the Pelicans, and that's one of the reasons he went there. He also feels like their roster and their coaching staff is conducive to him having a chance to stick in the NBA. He also got a promise from them that they are going to let him, no matter what happens here in the warm-up and then the summer league in Las Vegas, they're also going to bring him to camp. So he got the promise of having a spot there when they bring him to camp. So I think all those are positive things. He went to New Orleans over the weekend, this past weekend. He's been working out at their workout facility, and they'll do that. They did that Monday, Tuesday, today. Tomorrow they have an early workout, and then they all go to Las Vegas, where they play in this summer league thing for a week. So, you know, I think Patrick, and just showing some videotape of him and listening to the interview that he did with the local stations there in New Orleans, I just think that he's got the right mindset. I should have been drafted. I wasn't. I've got to be the most angry and productive guy here. And as I said on TV, it's hard to imagine Patrick angry, but if you can get to that, it's scary.
Well, motivated, right? I mean,
motivated. That's right.
Again, I think he has an uphill battle, and I like Patrick quite a bit personally, but I think he's got an uphill battle in the NBA because I don't think he's got a position.
I agree. And
he had a position. He had a position
in Europe. He could play in Europe tomorrow.
Yes, yeah. And right? if it was 20 years ago, he's a traditional 4, right? Just work on his shot a little bit, get a little more range. But he's a traditional low post power forward. But that position isn't really the same as it was when Karl Malone came in the league.
Right. You've got to be able to play facing the basket now.
Yeah.
In that position, and you know, maybe I've said this a while. If he's going to play in the NBA, it's going to take him 2 or 3 years to find the right coach and the right team, and then he'll stick. But in the right system. But it may take a while, and it may be New Orleans. I don't know. But like you said, he's not a guy that has a mid-range or a long-range game, and they're looking for guys who can rebound and have some offensive game. He is also a victim of how the game has changed from a European standpoint from what teams do, because they can draft European players and it doesn't count against the salary cap, despite the fact that they're not going to play there for 2 years.
The other local boy makes good. Daniel Murphy, former Inglewood High star, JU baseballer, makes the All-Star game with the Mets. I was doing the radio for JU when Daniel was in school. One of my favorite guys. He was on a team that included Gordy Gronkowski, one of the Gronks,
right.
And a lot of good guys who I still run into around town from that team. Murphy, though, always was a great hitter. I think he had 400 his senior year, and that's always been his thing. I've told you this story. I'll be a little bit repetitive. When they were freshmen and they came in to introduce themselves to their teammates, that they had to go around the locker room and say, you know, your name, what school you came from, and position. And somebody would say, oh, I'm, you know, Logan James from fill-in-the-blank high school, second base. It got to Murphy. He says, Daniel Murphy, Inglewood High School, hitter.
Hitter.
Hitter. And he continues to be, has been among the league leaders in hits this year.
I think he's got 109 hits now, 109 hits. And I've worked out with him quite a bit down at the Hit Center. And it always amazed me that he was the guy who kept getting injured. Because when you work out, when you're in the gym with him, he's dedicated. He does the right things. He works out the right way. He's He's doing a lot of functional exercises, but he just, for some reason, couldn't stay healthy.
And the way he plays the game, by the way, may lend itself to that. He's a little bit of a throwback. We talked about George Brett and that. He's a little bit of one of the a hustle guy.
But I mean, don't you think now you talk about a guy like Patrick Young who doesn't have a position, and Daniel Murphy probably has 5 positions, maybe 6. He probably can play every outfield position, second, third, and he probably could play first too.
He has played some first, yeah.
Right. So I mean, you're talking about a guy who's potentially going to have a long career in the league. And if he was left-handed, he'd play to his 50.
Right. Well, he's a left-handed hitter, so I mean, he's got that going for him. Yeah.
So there's a guy who's probably going to have a shot for a long time.
Yeah, and arbitration is a good thing when you start talking about where he is.
Yeah, that's true.
Trying to figure out what's going to happen there. All right, that'll do it for the Sam and Cole podcast. We'll revisit you after the World Cup final on Sunday. We are, as always, brought to you by Black Creek Outfitters. I'm actually heading in. I'll need to pick up my my training camp shirts, my high-tech training camp shirts that I've got coming in over there. And remember also the barbecue where the big green egg is over there.
Right. Well. Oh, that's right. And Joe said to me, by the way, that he has changed his size run for some of these shirts coming in simply because he said all I had was mediums left.
Yeah.
So clearly I needed something different.
I encountered that issue. I am not a medium.
That's right.
All right, that'll do it for the Sam and Cole podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.